Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Creative Path, A View from the Studio on the Making of Art, by Carolyn Schlam, narrated by Coleen Marlo. Chapter 1. Introduction. I am a visual artist and have been practicing for more than 40 years. The seed of my passion for art was planted before I was born, and came into manifestation very early. My mother would boast that she could calm me in my crib with a magazine. I could entertain myself by flipping through the pages, my fascination with pictures absorbing me even then. When I was 15, I drew a mother and child for my mother's birthday by clutching a teddy bear to myself in front of a mirror while drawing with the other hand. This picture was something she treasured, and when she passed, I took it back and hung it on my own wall. I look at it today in awe at my unconscious self that was able to create such a sensitive image out of the pure desire to please someone I loved. How hard I have worked since then to recapture the potency and authenticity of that image. Creative people are born with the need to express themselves. The appropriate form may take years to reveal itself, and the ability to express well even longer to develop. But the need comes full-blown, bursting, and irrepressible. It is a need that we may try to deny, but in many ways and times it comes back to assert itself and prod us into action. A prospective student visited my studio this week. I asked her if she was an artist, as she had that bright-eyed look I have recognized in the eyes of art folk. She said no, she hadn't made art, but she considered herself a creative person. Yes, I assured her, she was an artist at heart, and all she needed to do was take hand to brush to actualize that incipient talent. I suspect that you, listener, are such a person. My clue is that you have picked up this book to delve into the subject and therefore identify with it in some way. Whether you have actualized your creativity through visual art or any other art form, this book is written for you. It speaks to your spirit that longs to express, to reveal, and to celebrate. Though we are all unique, and our methodology is our own, we have much in common. We all want to express well and be understood. This book explores the pathways to those common goals. On our creative path, we all meet important people who can help us on our way. They may be teachers or fellow artists, authors, or people from history whose work inspires us. In my case, the first such person I met was Norman Raeben, a teacher of painting. I walked into his studio in the rehearsal halls of the famous Carnegie Hall in New York City on a Monday morning in 1969. I was 22 years old, a college graduate, and desperately wanting to be an artist. A friend, Andy, had started working in this class, and he invited me along. This was the only way students could possibly find the place. There were no advertisements, listings, or even a telephone, not that I recall anyway. I remember riding up in the elevator. The studio was on the 11th floor, and hearing the voices of the opera singers, echoes of violins and pianos, and the myriad sounds I would later learn came from artists at work. This part of the building was an annex to the famous Carnegie Hall Theater, and it was filled with artists of all stripes. I remember my excitement in thinking that perchance, I could be one of them. Norman Raeben was a gray-haired, robust lion of a man in his 70s. Renowned to be the best painting teacher in town by the little band of students who were his devotees. Andy was a recent convert. I learned that Norman was born in the year 1900 in Russia, and was in fact Norman Rabinowitz, the youngest son of the Yiddish writer Sholem Aleichem. He had changed his name to Raeben and was a painter who had known, studied, and worked with some of the art icons of the early 20th century. He had circled in an outer orbit of the Ashcan school painters, Lux, Sloane, Prendergast, Bellows. He had been a student of the great Robert Henry, whose ideas on art were collected by former pupil Marjorie Ryerson and published in 1923 as The Art Spirit. This wonderful book is still in print, and I have come to learn that much of Norman's message has its footing in this volume. Norman had, shall we say kindly, a commanding personality. Big, strong, insistent, and all-knowing. His bark was loud, and his bite could be piercing. He was formidable indeed. Remember, this was the late 1960s, and political correctness was a stance that had not yet taken hold of the common consciousness. The studio was Norman's domain, and he ruled. Conversation was definitely one way, and you had to be strong, frankly, to take it. He demanded total allegiance. We gave it because we knew how much he could give us, and we were willing to pay the price. Norman's studio was small and grimy with windows all around. Let me paint a picture of it for you. It was a squarish main room with floor-to-ceiling windows on two sides. Adjacent to the main room was an alcove near the slop sink, containing a rickety bed where he would sit, and some kind of makeshift coffee table where he would have his lunch and coffee and snacks. We were always going out for coffee. That was big. Even today, so many years later, I can still remember the visceral pleasure I felt coming into this place. I knew immediately when Andy brought me in that first Monday that this was where I wanted to be. The room was, and will always be for me, the quintessential art studio. High ceilings, natural light, radiators blasting warm air, the city vibrating with life outside the windows, but peacefully quiet in the studio. I think if we're lucky in life, we find a place and a vocation that feels just perfectly right, that answers our soul's calling. Other artists tell me they just love the smell of oil paint, that it just stirs them. For me, this warm, quiet, messy place was heaven, the place where I might perhaps discover my true self. This was the way it worked. Classes were every day, most of the day. People would trail in at different times in the morning. Some would come every day, some once or twice a week. It was up to you how much or how little you needed to come. Classes were $5 and we'd buy a card. I came 5 days a week, so it cost me $25. The schedule every week was the same. On Monday, we did still life. On Tuesday and Thursday, we worked from the live model. The rest of the week, we worked from other source material or our imagination. Norman was a very active instructor. He would demonstrate for us and stop us at whim to gather us around that old bed and fly into one of his passionate lectures. We would sit on the floor and try as best we could to capture every word. Imagine the scene. 10 of us would be crouching down around him with mouths agape like baby birds begging for his words of wisdom as we clutched our coffee cups. He would hold us there for long periods of time, and sometimes we itched to get up and go back to our easels. Norman would have none of this. He knew his charges wanted to get back to work and finish whatever it was we were so proudly and, shall I say, optimistically working on. That would really bug Norman, the idea of finishing. There was no start and no finish, only the continuum, the unending, ongoing experience. You couldn't argue, though. You had to come and you had to listen. Sometimes the talks would be long and rambling. Sometimes not. Sometimes one of us would be the rallying point for the lecture, as Norman would have us all stand and gaze at a painting one of us had made the previous day. They all hung on that third wall of the studio, and any of them could easily become the object of praise or ridicule. We shuddered at the prospect of the latter. It was unknowable. Today might become the day when we were extolled to the moon and back, or frankly, kicked to the curb. He would bring one of us to tears many, many times this way. Nonetheless, we'd report for class the following day. The study was too good to let a little pique keep us away. No prima donnas allowed. One thing Norman would do on a regular basis was to come around the room when we were all painting and stop at someone's canvas, pause and look, and then call all the rest of us to gather around. We all knew that this was the moment when Norman would pick up your brush, and you would wince as he proceeded in an instant to enthusiastically erase all the work you had executed so carefully and with such confidence of its rightness and value. Though we squirmed at this indignity, and hoped we would not be the chosen subject of the day's lesson, what he taught us with this method turned out to be one of the most important things of all. By painting over our work, he taught us to not be attached to the product, the outcome, but instead to value the doing, the experience. We groaned with wounded ego, but indeed this was one of the practices that enabled us to grow, improve, and ultimately make our way as mature artists. As I recall the experience of being a student in Norman's class, I think that perhaps it may be difficult for many of my listeners to appreciate how utterly transformative this experience was for me and my fellow students.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?